What happens inside a mind that looks at a peaceful afternoon, hears laughter in the distance, and sees only targets in its path? What kind of psychological transformation must occur for someone to turn calm into carnage, not out of impulse, but by design? On July 22, 2011, Anders Behring Breivik committed the deadliest act of violence in Norway since World War II. He detonated a car bomb near government offices in Oslo, killing 8 people. Hours later, he boarded a ferry to the island of Utøya, disguised as a police officer, and began a systematic massacre of young political campers. 69 lives were taken there, most of them teenagers, in a calculated slaughter that lasted over an hour. But this video is not about the body count, it's about the blueprint behind it, the mental architecture, the self-styled mission Breivik believed he was born to fulfill. Have you ever wondered what truly drives a mind like this? Not just to commit violence, but to justify it, intellectualize it, and prepare for it as though it were a sacred duty. Stay with me. The truths we are about to uncover go deeper than you might expect. Beneath the mask of ideological conviction lies a psychological pattern that deserves far more than headlines. To understand how this happened, we must start before the first explosion, when everything still looked normal. A man preparing for mass murder does not always look like a monster. Sometimes he looks disturbingly ordinary. Anders Breivik walked through that day with precision. No rage, no panic, just execution of a plan, of a vision of human lives. This wasn't a man who lost control. It was someone who believed he had found it. He moved through the day as if fulfilling a prophecy he'd written for himself. In his mind, he was not committing a crime, he was making history, and this is where the psychology deepens. Because behind every act of extraordinary violence lies a mind that has redefined its own moral code. Breivik's reality was no longer tethered to shared human empathy. He had replaced it with ideology, inflated with delusion, sealed by certainty. Have you ever recognized fragments of these patterns in ordinary people? Share your perception, your voice matters here. And if you haven't yet, check whether you're subscribed to Criminal Psychology Unmasked. Here, we question, we analyze, we never excuse. Let's go deeper. Breivik wasn't just carrying weapons. He was carrying an identity, one he had meticulously crafted over years of isolation, online radicalization, and inner monologues no one else could hear. To understand his actions, we have to understand who he believed he was, and what mission he believed demanded this level of horror. Anders Behring Breivik didn't simply wake up one day and become a mass murderer. His journey into violence was rooted in a years-long psychological reconstruction of identity, a slow, deliberate process in which his perception of the world and of himself began to drift from shared reality. He stopped seeing himself as a citizen or even a man. Instead, he adopted the image of a cultural warrior, claiming he was part of a secretive movement to save Europe from multiculturalism and Islam. His 1,518-page manifesto was not just a document, it was the architecture of a new self. He referred to himself as Justiciar Knight Commander of a fictional order he claimed to represent. He believed he was destined to trigger a civilizational awakening, stating during his trial, "I would have done it again. I gave myself over to this mission." This wasn't political, it was pathological, a complete mental departure from social consensus, masked by intellectual language and strategic framing. In court, Breivik stood emotionless. He performed a clenched fist salute and described the youth he murdered as legitimate targets, betraying no hint of remorse. Psychiatric evaluations were split. Some labeled him delusional, others sane, but ideologically fixated. But what emerged unmistakably was the clarity of his internal logic. Every decision, every action, was part of the identity he had built, not a man on trial, but a soldier fulfilling destiny. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover: how isolation, online echo chambers, and unchecked narcissism combined to reinforce this delusion until it became his truth. If this analysis sparked something inside you, leave in the comments. There's always a hidden layer. The complexity of this mind doesn't end here. Anders Breivik's transformation into a killer wasn't driven by chaos or uncontrolled rage. It was a deliberate and methodical evolution, rooted in ideological radicalization and fueled by a deep sense of narcissistic entitlement. He didn't lash out impulsively. He studied, planned, and wrote, not to convince others, but to convince himself. His manifesto, written over several years, reveals a mind obsessed with historical revenge and cultural purity. He quoted philosophers, political figures, and far-right ideologues, twisting their messages to serve his own delusional framework. It wasn't about truth. It was about constructing a justification so elaborate that it could suppress any remaining empathy. Breivik chose his target symbolically. The teenagers at Utøya represented, in his mind, the future political class he blamed for what he called the cultural suicide of Europe. He referred to them in court as traitors, stating, "They would grow up to betray the country. I had to act before it was too late." These weren't human beings to him. They were abstract concepts, dehumanized through ideology. That psychological distance allowed him to shoot them one by one, reloading calmly, walking among bodies as if performing a ritual. During trial, one psychiatrist noted his unshakable belief in his ideological framework as a mechanism of mental protection. It insulated him from guilt, from moral conflict, from the horror of what he had done. In that courtroom, Breivik did not express regret. Instead, he criticized the media for not taking his ideas seriously, revealing just how deeply the identity of the ideological warrior had consumed him. But to fully understand how murder became mission, we must now look at something even more chilling: the emotional void that made it possible to carry out the plan without flinching. Now we enter the most disturbing layer of all, the emotional void behind the ideology. In the courtroom, as families wept and survivors recounted moments of terror, Anders Breivik remained composed, cold, and unnervingly articulate. There were no signs of internal conflict, no emotional hesitation when recounting how he hunted teenagers across the island of Utøya. At one point, he described the killings as necessary pain and claimed, "I would have preferred to use a drone or a bomb, but I had no choice." This was the most effective method. The language he used was clinical, strategic, devoid of human resonance. A survivor testified that Breivik calmly reloaded his weapon multiple times, even returning to victims who were still alive to finish the job. This wasn't improvisation. It was emotional detachment in its most terrifying form. The question then becomes, how does a person become this disconnected from empathy? Some psychiatrists proposed a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, pointing to his grandiose sense of purpose and lack of remorse. Others leaned toward a paranoid psychosis, but many agreed that whatever the label, there was a striking gap between Breivik's intellectual clarity and his total absence of effective response. During the trial, he smiled at moments he felt validated, especially when his ideological arguments were quoted by the media. But when confronted with the suffering of his victims, his expression remained frozen, impassive. This is not simply about belief systems. It's about what happens when ideology fuses with a damaged emotional core, when justification meets absence. The result is a person capable of unspeakable violence, not in spite of emotion, but because of its total erasure. And yet, even this chilling detachment isn't the end of the journey. To truly see the full picture, we must now face the most dangerous part of his mind, the delusions of grandeur that gave his crimes meaning. The deeper we go into Breivik's psyche, the clearer it becomes that his crimes were not only acts of violence, but chapters in a personal mythology, one he believed would grant him immortality. He wasn't just killing, he was narrating his own legacy. In his manifesto, he wrote, "My deeds will be understood in 50, maybe 60 years. I'm not expecting immediate recognition." This wasn't humility, it was grandeur. wrapped in martyrdom. He compared himself to historical crusaders, revolutionary leaders, and ideological warriors, positioning himself as the misunderstood architect of Europe's salvation. Breivik's entire mental construction rested on the idea of delayed glorification. He believed he would one day be seen as a visionary, a man who acted while others hesitated. This belief allowed him to distance himself from the blood, from the screams, from the lifeless bodies of teenagers on the ground. To him, they were necessary sacrifices in a historical movement. During his trial, he described the massacre not as murder, but as a preventive attack to save my people. That linguistic shift from killing to saving exposes the scaffolding of delusion that allowed him to bear the psychological weight of his actions. The courtroom itself became a stage for this fantasy. He requested to wear a uniform he designed for his invented order, and when denied, performed rigid salutes and delivered ideological statements with theatrical precision. These were not spontaneous outbursts. They were rehearsed performances intended to inscribe his identity into public memory. For Breivik, prison wasn't a punishment. It was a cocoon for myth-making. But even the grandest delusions must eventually confront reality. And as the trial ended, society faced a new question. How does a nation recover from the psychological impact of a man who killed not only with weapons, but with ideas? Now we step into the aftermath and into the shadows it cast. When the gunfire stopped and silence returned to Utøya, Norway was left with more than grief. It was left with questions no society wants to ask, not just about security or ideology, but about the human mind itself. How could someone born and raised in a peaceful, democratic nation carry out such carnage with calm precision? How could such darkness be concealed behind the face of someone so seemingly ordinary? In the aftermath, Norway's legal system was tested to its limits. Breivik was declared criminally sane, a decision that shocked many, especially after reports described his lack of remorse and grandiose fantasies. Yet the court concluded that he was not psychotic, but fully aware of his actions, driven by a distorted but deliberate belief system. That ruling sparked a nationwide debate. Was this justice? Or had the law simply confirmed that sanity and evil are not mutually exclusive? Psychologists were divided. Some saw Breivik's actions as emerging from a rare convergence of narcissism, isolation, and ideological intoxication. Others warned against over-pathologizing, insisting that such violence must also be understood in cultural and digital contexts, where online echo chambers can validate the most extreme worldviews. Survivors, meanwhile, spoke of a different reality, one of permanent loss, and of the psychological wounds that no sentence could heal. Public reaction was measured, yet heavy. Vigils were held, flowers laid, names read aloud, but underneath the dignity, the same quiet terror echoed. If a man like Breivik could blend into normal life while nurturing such beliefs, how many others might walk among us, unseen, unheard, unchallenged? This is where psychological inquiry matters most, not to excuse but to expose. And as we approach the final layer of this case, we turn toward a question that still haunts every frame of this tragedy. What does truly understanding him reveal about us? In the end, what Anders Breivik forces us to confront is not just the horror of what he did, but the discomfort of what he reveals. His journey, from a socially withdrawn man to the architect of one of the most devastating attacks in European history, wasn't marked by chaos or visible madness. It was subtle, structured, deliberate. That's the most unsettling revelation. The transformation didn't erupt suddenly. It evolved quietly, hidden behind the normal rhythms of everyday life. Friends described him as distant, but not dangerous. Former classmates recalled him as ambitious, a bit arrogant, but forgettable. Nothing screamed alarm until it was too late. What does that tell us about the perception of danger? About the filters we use to decide who is normal and who isn't? During his trial, Breivik said, "You will not understand me now, but history will prove me right." In that sentence lies the clearest glimpse into his mind. A man consumed by a personal mythology, deaf to empathy, blinded by certainty, and yet still functioning, still planning, still blending into the world around him. That's the shadow that lingers. The true impact of Breivik's actions isn't confined to the lives lost, though those scars are permanent. It's in the psychological residue he leaves behind, the realization that sometimes the danger isn't in the rage we see, but in the silence we overlook. That behind calculated decisions, a fractured identity can grow, concealed beneath intellect and ideology. So we're left with the mirror, and the question it quietly demands: if we looked closely enough, would we see these patterns sooner? Or are some truths only visible in the wreckage? If this exploration left you questioning more than it answered, you're not alone. This channel exists for those who understand that the human mind is not a headline, it's a labyrinth. Here at Criminal Psychology Unmasked, we don't simplify. We trace patterns, we ask difficult questions. And if that journey speaks to you, consider subscribing, not for answers, but for deeper inquiry. Right below, there's always a deeper origin. Your reflection matters more than you know. If you value psychological depth over sensationalism, a like will help us keep these investigations honest, focused, and alive. But don't let this story end here. What we uncovered today was just the external structure, the carefully built identity, the ideological armor, the emotional void. In 2 days, we'll unlock the locked door behind it all. Childhood, upbringing, the invisible fractures no one noticed until it was too late. Behind every action lies a long, hidden journey. In the next video, we'll go back to where it all began, to the early fractures, the silent triggers that shaped a mind into something unrecognizable. I'll be waiting for you in the next chapter. Don't miss it.